What's going on YouTube? Got another video for you here today. It's been a little while, been busy with work and all sorts of other stuff, but Path of Exile 2 is coming out, so we're back and we'll be streaming, doing all that stuff again. But, you know, with the release of a new game, I kind of wanted to just make a quick video on some things that I think about when I'm creating my character, especially in a new game, right? Like, so with Path 1, these were things that I did take into account based on the league. But this is primarily going to be for how I like to look at the going into a new game and what type of character I want to make. You know, obviously you're going to have your favorite archetype, which, you know, maybe you like ranged, maybe you like melee, maybe you like totems or minions or whatever. We all have the archetypes that we like. But I think sometimes with the release of a new game, sacrificing a little bit of, you know, maybe not playing your favorite character, but playing a character that's going to be effective can often be a little bit more fun than struggling through your favorite archetype, if that makes sense. So these are kind of some things that I think about. You know, for instance, and I like, you know, for those of you that watch a lot of my content, you know, I like magic find, I like bows, I like all that kind of stuff. Diablo 4, when the game first came out, I actually played a melee character, which I don't play often. I'm playing one here in Path, right? This was the melee league, but I don't play these very often. And I'll kind of get into why, but I'm just trying to, you know, kind of set the mood a little bit here and say that not my favorite archetype, but the first character I made in Diablo 4 actually was a melee barbarian. And we'll get into a little bit of that, you know, as we get going. So we'll kind of dive right in. I do want to take a quick look at a couple of the resources that we do have. So there's not a ton out yet. I'm sure over the course of, you know, the next 10, 11 days, whatever it is, the 6th, before Path of Exile 2 comes out, we will, you know, get, you know, little bits and pieces here. People will figure things out, you know, Surgog, all those types of guys that like to analyze things. We'll get some more information, and you know, maybe some of these, you know, some of the things that you hear or see or whatever might, you know, will be beneficial to this video. And, you know, by all means, I make these videos to try to help you, but these also help me probably more than you realize. So if you have any information or there's a new post or whatever the case is, that you think might be beneficial to, you know, kind of, you know, compile onto what I'm saying here, that would be helpful. I would appreciate it. I think everybody else would too. But, and this, we're not going to go over these crazy, but just a general idea, right? Like making a build in Path of Exile 1, you know, it's very similar to the passive tree is very similar in the sense that most characters, you know, tight archetypes of characters are going to live within these certain parts of the tree, right? And, you know, now it's a little bit different where I think everybody, you know, now starts from the middle and you branch out and all that kind of stuff. And that's not to say that builds aren't going to, you know, creep into other sections, but this is kind of generally how it would go, similar to Path of Exile 2, you know, where everything's kind of broken up, you know, into sections, you know, with your witches and stuff up here, you know, your rangers and your melee characters and, you know, strength and dex and int and, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, the starting points are a little bit different. So, but it's very similar in that sense. So, you know, that's nice and just something that'll be familiar. So initially, now with that being said, and we'll kind of go into, we'll look at a brief description of some of the classes at the end, but I kind of wanted to go through this first. And the first thing that I often think about is, do I want to be an attack character or do I want to be a caster, right? And in a game like Diablo, you don't have to worry about stats like accuracy and things like that, right? Like you hit things or you don't, right? But in Path, you actually have to stack a statistic, which is accuracy. And sometimes it can be a little difficult based on some of the items and stuff that we've seen. They look very similar, so I'm sure it'll be fine. And there's auras and precision and all that kind of stuff. But it is something you have to think about when you're choosing an attack character in Path of Exile. You know, where you're going to get it from. You know, you can get it from the tree, you can get it from items, and you can get it from auras, like I said, precision, things like that. The next thing you have to think about is, like, are you going to be using any unique items, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, are you going to need attack speed or cast speed? Because again, in Path, both stats are different and spells require cast speed, attacks require attack speed, right? And then the next thing you can think about is, you know, are you going to go physical or elemental or whatever the case is, or chaos in this case? You know, what kind of damage are you going to do? Because these are all just kind of the general things that you're going to need to do damage, right? You need to make sure you're hitting things. You need to make sure you're hitting things as often as possible. And you need to make sure that when you hit things, they do damage. So like, where are you going to obtain these stats? And again, spells are really nice because you don't need accuracy, right? So that is a stat that then can go into something else, a survivability, you know, life, or whatever the case is, right? Just energy shield, armor, whatever you might be trying to do, or just damage. So something to think about. That's kind of the first thing that I try to decide. And, you know, in my opinion, I often like to go attack characters, just because it's just my preference. But with that being said, I won't always, if I feel like with the information that is provided, that I'm able to caster to be more effective when I first start playing the game and I'm learning it and things like that, right? So again, that's the first thing. Not super important. The next, you know, kind of things we'll get into are more important, I think. So are you going to go a tank character or a damage based character? You know, and then again, there's going to be, you know, the in-betweens, whatever, you know, you'll do some damage, survivability, and that's probably the dream. You know, when on the first character that you make in a new game, is that it has enough damage and survivability to tank a few things, or you know, but also kill them in a timely manner. But again, typically you're going to have to start somewhere, and I personally believe that a tank at the start of a game, something that has more survivability, is going to be more beneficial than something that has a lot of damage, right? Because if you're not going to know the mechanics of the game, you're going to need to learn the bosses, you're going to need to learn all these new enemies, you're going to, you know, et cetera. Now there's like a dash or a roll, you know. So all these things, right, while you're learning the mechanics, it's nice to have a little bit more survivability than damage, because if you have to hit something an extra 15 times, but you can tank, you know, maybe one or two of the boss's attacks that you wouldn't be able to if you had more damage but require 15 less hits, it's a lot nicer to not have to, you know, portal in, portal out, you know, run through the map, whatever it may be that you're doing, and just hit the boss a few more times. So I typically tend to lean more towards a tankier character, and kind of going back to the Diablo 4, that's why I went Barbarian. Not my favorite archetype of character, but it was made the game, the first time I ever played it, really, really easy. So, and again, it, you know, with that being said, it also being a little bit tankier allows you to actually learn the mechanics where, you know, you can survive something, still get hit. So maybe you can learn the hit boxes of a slam or something like that, right? And it kind of helps you just with stuff like that. So I personally think that having a little more survivability at the start of a game is going to be better than having more damage and, you know, less survivability. So next, the next thing you have to think is, do you want a hit-based character? Do you want a damage over time character, or a totems / minion or minions? Because that's a similar play style. Is kind of the next thing that I think about, right? Hit-based, this is not, and again, they take some of these things with a grain of salt, but I feel like oftentimes hit-based mechanics are a little bit more difficult to get off the ground, because you need attack speed, things like that. And you actually, and the main reason being that you need to actually be near, or not near the thing, but you need to actively be attacking to do damage, and not necessarily surviving mechanics and learning the game and learning what the boss is doing and things like that, because you're constantly having to not only avoid those things, but attack at the same time to do damage. And you get into kind of the dot or the totem, you know, minions, totems, you're able to do some damage, right? Focus up the boss or the pack or whatever. And then you can actually spend time avoiding mechanics and things like that while you are doing damage, right? So dot, totems, minions are similar in that regard, that, you know, if you have a bunch of minions running around or totems, then, you know, you can kind of just run around the boss room or whatever the case is while those things are doing damage, which is really nice for a new game, because it allows you to kind of learn the game a little bit better, not die as often, but still be doing damage. And, you know, hopefully, I'm really hoping that bleed comes back in Path of Exile 2. I love bleed, but chances are, and again, we'll get into this later, but it's highly likely that I go a poison-based build right off the start. You know, some of the new ascendancies and stuff like that look really good. So that's kind of what I'm leaning, just to kind of throw that out there. I think that dot builds are my personal favorite, like league starter and or character for a new game, just because you're able to do damage while still being able to run around and avoid things and loot or whatever it is that you need to do, right? So, and then with Totem's minions, I think again in that regard it's similar to Dot, probably even less active than Dot. Well, it's much less active than Dot. You're just making sure your minions are alive, and then you're doing whatever you need to do defensively. But that's a playstyle that not everybody loves. I personally am not a huge Totem minion playstyle. I like to have as few buttons as possible, but I also like to kind of actively do all the things. Every once in a while I'll make a minion or a totem, and I always enjoy them for the most part, but they're kind of just not really my style of play. So, I don't typically do that. But occasionally, we'll dabble. So next, ranged versus melee. So again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's nice. Ranged kind of inherently gives you survivability, right? Because you don't have to be close to things to attack them, whether that be an attack or a spell. And so that does allow you to allocate more resources into damage, because inherently you gain survivability by just being able to stay away from things. But you still often like a bow character, for instance, which is my favorite type of character, they're just very squishy. So yeah, you're fine when you're away from things, but if you end up close to something, then you're in big trouble. But again, you can have a tankier, ranged character as well. And then melee. So melee, typically, the way that you're going to build your character is going to be, more armor and life and things like that. So you're going to be kind of just a stronger base character, because you have to be, right? You just simply have to be able to survive more attacks than if you were a ranged character. So, and again, with ranged characters, I also feel like in a game like Path, and when I say ranged, I kind of mean bow, because you can have ranged spell things, and you could say like brands or something like that just chain, or spark or whatever, that chain across the map. But I don't, that's still ranged. But I do feel like those types of builds do get expensive on the upper end of, when you're really trying to make your character strong. Characters like that do get very expensive. And melee is and this might be nonsense, and I'm sure you guys will have something to say, but I just always feel like it's a little bit easier to make a melee character feel good than it does to make a ranged character feel good, if that makes sense. So let me know if that's stupid or whatever, but that's kind of just my thoughts. And then the last thing, to think about, and again, these are all kind of basic things. There's nothing really crazy about any of these. But are you going to go physical, elemental, or chaos? What kind of damage do you want to do? And these are just, the things I have here. These are all based on kind of Path of Exile 1. I'm assuming, it's going to be a similar vibe. But if I'm totally wrong, with kind of the things above this, I think are all generally fine, regardless of what happens. These ones down here now, I'm assuming will stay the same, but these physical elements or chaos points, kind of a lot of it is based on Path of Exile 1. So physical is, the most consistent, right? The range of damage, from when you see a line on an item that's like, adds 20 to 35 physical damage to attacks, that range is much smaller than, say, something like lightning, which is the largest, which might be, anywhere from 3 damage to, 400 damage. So a massive range, right? So that creates some inconsistencies every time you attack, because the damage is going to be somewhere within that range, right? So Phys is the most consistent, but it also typically gets very, very expensive. It's hard to get a lot of flat physical damage and to have items that are good for that type of thing. And it is hard to put together a physical build that isn't bleed, I guess, is something I should probably. Bleed, it's generally, hopefully, right? Like bleed does feel good in Path of Exile 1 early. It doesn't scale very well, so that's kind of the problem. So I'm hoping the end game bleed damage will be much better than it has been for quite a long time in Path of Exile 1. So, but again, Phys, bleed is nice. And I'm assuming and going out on a limb and thinking that it'll probably be good, especially for early game, like it has been for such a long time. Hopefully now it'll be good end game. So we'll see. Elemental, again, now you have multiple types of elemental, right? You have fire, cold, lightning. Those ranges are much different. You know, it's harder to, it's easy to get a lot of flat damage from elemental, and then you can focus on crit or other things like that. So it is much more affordable. Like a lot of times when I make a magic find build, it's quite often with a bow, I will start it elemental and then eventually convert it to physical convert. So that's kind of like, it's just a little bit easier and a little bit cheaper to find damage sources. You have heralds, you have, you know, flat damage all over everything, 3 different types of it. But again, you know, part of the thing is that damage, one of the reasons why, you know, it's all over the place is, you know, again, those ranges. So it doesn't really matter. You can get a ton of it, but that's kind of just a little tidbit, I guess, that goes along with the elemental. And now chaos. So chaos, again, and kind of leading back into why I'll probably start poison, is traditionally chaos scales very well off of gem levels and the tree. In the past has been quite a bit of chaos damage, % chaos increase in the tree. And then most of the time, well, yes, a lot of the chaos gems all have flat chaos on them, that supplement, right? So now you're getting a flat and a %, without even having any items. So all the items you get early on just kind of benefit that. So chaos is really, really nice early league and something to think about. You know, there's a ton of, you know, with all this being said, there's a ton of, you know, resources out there. You know, there's a lot of people, you know, like Ziz played, what was his thing? He played, Contagion, right? Forever. Essence Strain Contagion, right? And so, and he would league start it, you know, consistently for a number of leagues just because chaos was so good to start the league with, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to go dot with chaos or whatever, but chaos typically is pretty nice when the league is just starting. And then again, you add that to poison, which now it's a new game, new bosses, new mechanics. It kind of is the best of both worlds. So I'm heavily leaning towards dot chaos poison. So which again, if it's the same, scales with Phys as well. So if you have something you want to change into later that's physical based, you can kind of build your character like that as well. So it kind of offers quite a bit of freedom for, you know, transitioning later or whatever the case may be. All right, well, that's all. Again, these are just kind of general points, some things to think about. There's plenty of resources out there. If you guys want to take a really deep dive, you know, there's a lot of great creators out there. I've been gone for quite a while. Again, apologies for those of you guys that, you know, my OG followers and subscribers and viewers and all that. I've been gone. I've just been busy with work but holidays coming up. My contract is up, so I'll be back to streaming daily and making videos and all that kind of stuff. But this is, you know, I'm excited. I'm really excited for the game. I'm excited to get back hanging out with all you guys. And yeah, we'll see you then. What do we got? About 10 days. And we're in it. All right. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.